In this lesson, we're going to be graphing lines using the x and the y intercepts. So the y coordinate of all x-intercepts, it's important to understand that every point on the x-axis is 0. Every coordinate, the y coordinate of all points on the x-axis is 0, because if the point is on the x-axis, you're going 0 units up or down. Likewise, all the x-coordinates on the y-axis are 0, because if the point is on the y-axis, then you're moving 0 units to the left or to the right. So that leads us to the process of finding the x and the y-intercepts. A couple lessons ago, we discussed that the x and the y in the equation of a line represent points on the line. So if we're trying to find the x-intercept, we're going to replace the y with 0. And likewise, if we're trying to find the y-intercept, we're going to replace the x with 0. All right, first example. So first we're going to find the x-intercept. So we're going to replace the y with 0 and then solve for x. When we solve for x, we get x equals 2. And similar process for the y-intercept. The y-intercept, we're going to replace the x with 0. 2 times 0 is 0. That leaves us with y equals 4. So the x-intercept is 2. That coordinate is at 2, 0. And the y-intercept is 4. That coordinate is 0, 4. Once you have those 2 points plotted, you only need 2 points to define a line. Draw a line through those 2 points, and we have our graph. Next example, again, to find the x-intercept, we're going to replace the y with 0 and solve for x. For the x-intercept, we get 0. For the y-intercept, we're going to replace the x with 0 and solve for y. The y-intercept is also 0. Now notice what we have just defined is the origin. All right, if the x-intercept is 0 and the y-intercept is 0, we still only have 1 point. So we need to revert to using the table method to come up with one other point. You need more than 1 point to graph a line. So I just wrote down the equation x plus y equals 0 and set the whole thing equal to y. You get y equals negative x. And then just plug in any number for x. I just plugged in 1 for x. When you plug in 1 for x, for y, you get negative 1. That corresponds to the point 1, negative 1. So if we graph that point 1, negative 1, we have a second point. Draw a line through those 2 points, and we are done. Next example, to find the x-intercept, replace the y with 0. We get 7x equals negative 4, divide by 7. X equals negative 4 over 7, which negative 4 over 7, we'll come back to that. To find the y-intercept, plug in 0 for x. That gives us negative 2y equals negative 4. Divide both sides by negative 2, y equals 2. Now when we go to graph this, it's just important that you know that negative 4 over 7, it's a number between 0 and negative 1. So whenever you're plotting that point, you just plot a point anywhere between 0 and negative 1. And then for the y-intercept, you're going to put a dot at 2 on the y-axis. We have our 2 coordinates, draw a line through those 2 coordinates, and we're done. Next example, same process. To find the x-intercept, plug in 0 for y, solve for x. You get 2x equals 9, divide both sides by 2. X equals 9 over 2, which is between 4 and 5. So when we go to graph the x-intercept, we should be plotting a point between 4 and 5 on the x-axis. For the y-intercept, we're going to plug in 0 for x, solve for y. We get negative 3y equals 9, divide both sides by negative 3, y equals negative 3. So again, when we plot the x-intercept, There should be a point between +4 and +5. And then for the y-intercept, we should have a point at -3 on the y-axis. Once you have your 2 points, draw a line through those 2 points, and we have our graph. Last example, again for the x-intercept, plug in 0 for y. We get 1/5 x times 10, and if you divide both sides by 1/5, that's the same thing as multiplying both sides by 5, which is the reciprocal of 1/5. So we multiply both sides by 5, and we get x equals 50. For the y-intercept, plug in 0 for the x, and we get y equals 10. So we need to set up a scale for the x and y axis. So each one of the grid lines would represent 5 units. So for the x-intercept, we should have a dot or a point at 50. And for the y-intercept, we should have a point at 10. Draw a line through those 2 points, and we have the graph of our line.